Love under the scope.
Welcome back to Love Under the Scope. This is a podcast where we are going to explore all of the ups, the downs of being in a long-term relationship. I really want to get into some of the gnarly, nitty-gritty stuff that happens when you decide to enter a relationship with another human being. We would like to think that it's all rainbows and butterflies and just happy all the time, but that's just not true. Sometimes it's difficult when we are getting in deep emotionally, spiritually, physically with another person. So it's totally normal for these scary, sad, and hard moments to come up. And that's what I want to talk about here. I want to sort of normalize this idea that we can talk about these things. It's okay. It's okay to tell the truth about how we feel, about what we're experiencing, about how hard it is sometimes to basically have your shit reflected back to you in another person all the time. That's what a long-term relationship is. That's why it can be so gratifying. It can be so transformative. It can be one of the most spiritual experiences that you will ever have in your life. And it can also be quite difficult. There can be moments where we're just wondering, what is going on? Am I alone in this? I've had moments where I felt that way. I felt alone. I felt crazy. I was brought to my knees by my relationship, not at the fault of my partner, just because that's the nature of a relationship sometimes. So for today, we're going to cover something that came up to me yesterday in a meditation. I was planning to cover something totally different today, and I had this realization that I needed to talk about self-sabotage in relationships. I think of RuPaul's Drag Race, your inner saboteur, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Why do we self-sabotage in relationships? Why do we get into these beautiful, loving, special relationships, and then something comes up within us and goes, fuck it all up? It's totally normal to have those feelings in a relationship. And so I want to talk about it. So why should you listen to me? Me, Kelby. I am a Vita trained relationship and self-love coach. So I actually work with my clients to address a lot of what we are going to talk about today. I was trained not only by Vita, but I have been trained by life. I have a very close family member who has helped me to walk through these flames repeatedly. And I am in a long-term relationship of it'll be 7 years in March when we are going to get married, actually. I just realized that lines up nicely. And so I have kind of done some of this work myself. I am certainly not done, but I have done a chunk of this kind of inner work that we do to address things like the inner saboteur, if you want to call it that. It could be called a lot of different things. In this episode, I'm going to use terms like self-sabotage and sabotage interchangeably. I will use the term inner saboteur. I will use kind of a variety of verbiage to address this idea of sabotaging a relationship. And I think they're interchangeable because when we're talking about self-sabotage and sabotaging the relationship, they're kind of one and the same, right? We are not only sabotaging the actual relationship, but we're sabotaging our own happiness. So what is self-sabotage in terms of a long-term relationship? Self-sabotage in terms of a relationship is when we either consciously or subconsciously find reasons to ruin or leave or destroy our own happiness within a relationship or the relationship itself. It could look like picking fights. It could look like criticizing every little thing your partner does. It could look like lying to your partner, cheating on your partner, or having strong urges to do so. It could be nitpicking your partner, projecting your own crap onto your partner, which we do all the time, arguably. It could be ghosting someone or shutting down on them completely. It could be turning towards substances or falling deeper into substance abuse. It could be comparison. You're comparing, well, my relationship doesn't look exactly like Tom and Sally's, so it must not be good enough. It must not be real. I might have to break up with this person because it doesn't look like that relationship. This isn't a comprehensive list, but those are just some examples of how self-sabotage could manifest in a relationship. You might notice that your inner saboteur comes to you through a voice in your head, through thoughts that might be obsessive, might be compulsive. You might notice that your inner saboteur comes up via behavioral issues. You might notice that you get these rush of emotions with your inner saboteur and you can't control them. They take over your entire being when they come up. You might experience your inner saboteur through sexual desire. Everyone has their own way of experiencing the inner saboteur. There is not a one-size-fits-all situation here. You can go through my list and see if you identify with any of them. And there could be some other examples that I didn't list that you identify with. And the reason that there's so many various ways of the inner saboteur showing up is because we all have different experiences in our childhood. A lot of my episodes will bring us back to childhood because I believe that's where a lot of our shit stems from. So we all have a different self-sabotage strategy because we concoct those strategies a lot of the time in our childhood. And so we're going to get into this next section of where does self-sabotage come from? Self-sabotage usually comes from our childhood. I say usually because there are exceptions to that. It's not a hard and fast rule, but a lot of the time it does stem from our conditioning in our childhood. And that could go all the way to newborn age into our preteen years, our teenage years, even into our 20s, our early 20s. And beyond. We have all of these different iterations of our experience, all these different ages of us are stored in our body. And so in terms of this topic, sabotage in the context of relationships, we'll go back to how you were modeled love. So how did you come to understand love felt, love was given, love was received in your childhood? What were your examples and your experience of love? Whether it was for the good or the bad, we carry the good and the bad with us in our body. We store that. So our ego comes to understand this version of love that we learned in our childhood, either from our parents, other caregivers, teachers, could be siblings, extended family, society, all of these things. I find that it is a lot of the time our parents, but it certainly could go beyond that. So our ego understands that version of love as safe, and it kind of becomes our default mode. So when I say safe, I want to be very clear that that doesn't mean that the version of love you learned is safe and that it is good for you necessarily. It could have been actually dangerous. It could have been threatening. What I mean by safe is it's our normal. It's our default. We as children concoct coping strategies in which to navigate this type of love that we have learned. We're very thrifty, we're very crafty as children. So we come up with these very specific strategies for navigating this iteration of love. And we take that and we store it deep into our bodies, into the system. And so it becomes completely ingrained in us that love is this. Love looks like what I experienced in my childhood, no matter what that was. If it was good for us, if it was bad for us, if it felt icky, if we felt alone, it doesn't matter. That's what became our default mode. So an example could be, I understand how to deal with people that cannot meet my emotional needs. And the way that I do that is I throw a tantrum. I go to my room and I deal with things on my own. I lie to my parents, etc., etc. These are all strategies for coping with the love that we understand within our family. Self-sabotage can also stem from particularly traumatic or painful events. So a very tough breakup, any time where we felt intense pain around being vulnerable, around being seen or understood, anything that has to do with this idea of love, connection. If we experienced pain around that and it was very intense for us, we will store information in our body that is saying it is not safe to be vulnerable. It is not safe to open up to somebody. And therefore, I'm going to guard the hell out of my heart, out of my emotions, out of my being. It becomes a huge risk to fall in love again, to be vulnerable with another person, no matter who it is, but especially in a romantic relationship where I've explained this in a previous episode, we are equating the love from our partner as the love from our parents, and our parents are who took care of us, who made sure we survived, right? So there's these huge stakes around not only our parents, that relationship, but the relationship with our partner. The idea that you could be left and abandoned by this person. It's this huge risk to be vulnerable to them if you have gone through this conditioning in your childhood. So now you know what self-sabotage is and where it stems from. So why do we self-sabotage? It seems so counterintuitive. We get into these beautiful relationships. We love somebody deeply. They see us, they understand us. Maybe it's not perfect, right? It's never perfect, but for the most part, you're doing well and you're coasting along. And then there's the saboteur saying, set it on fire right now, run away, blow it up, right? Why do we do this? Why do we take something so beautiful and try to push it away? You would think that we would want it and bring it closer to us and continuously want to connect more and more with that person. But that's not always true if you had a childhood where you did not feel seen, where you did not feel you could be vulnerable in safety, where you were criticized for being emotional, where you were criticized for your vulnerability. If you felt pain around connecting with other humans, connecting with your parents specifically, that will lead to this inner saboteur coming forward as you get deeper into a relationship. So why do we do this? Generally, the inner saboteur will come forward when we are reaching another level of our relationship. So anytime we are moving away from that default mode that I talked about, that the ego understands, the ego understands how to receive love in that way. Anytime we move away from that and towards something that may be healthier and good for us, that's where the inner saboteur will come. Why does it come forward? Because it wants to protect us. Very desperately wants to protect us. This is all about self-preservation. So the ego comes forward as it feels us moving closer and closer to this person. And the ego goes, stop the fucking bus. I want to get off. What is this? I don't understand this. I was given these set of rules about love. Love is cruel. Love is cold. Love is hard. And that's not true about this relationship. I'm confused and I hate it. Let me off right now. That is the ego. The ego will run your life in this kind of reactive, very emotional, explosive way if you don't intervene. So going back to that default mode, why is there so much protection going on here? Because the default mode is what allowed us to stay alive as children. Think about a child, 2, 3, even younger than that. A child cannot take care of themselves. A child relies on their parents to take care of them, to feed them, to house them, to clothe them. The child relies on their parents and maybe extended family as well to take care of them. So in a child's eyes, although it may not be totally logical to an adult, being taken care of requires them to sort of appease their parents or to be loved, to perceive that they are loved by their parents. So in order to be loved by these people, they're like gods to us when we are a child. We will fit ourselves into these boxes. So if we notice that mom doesn't respond to our happiness, mom or dad doesn't respond to my sadness, mom or dad does not respond to my emotional needs, we will learn to twist those emotions, to twist those needs, and to scrunch them into those boxes because we are looking for pure survival. Every living being is looking to survive above everything else. And that is true for children too. That is why they become so crafty in creating these coping strategies because they are literally trying to survive. This inner saboteur is kind of like a piece of our ego that is coming up and seeing, oh God, you're getting more vulnerable. Why are you opening up to this person? Why are they so nice to you? I don't understand this. It's an unknown factor to the ego. The ego doesn't grasp how to handle this new version of love. The ego is kind of freaking out and having a fit and coming up with all of these ways for you to destroy and to avoid this relationship that is basically helping you to open up and be vulnerable and become connected to another human being. When we as children come up with those coping strategies and we say, mom doesn't recognize my need for being soothed or being attended to, we will not only create these coping strategies, but we'll also usually will ingrain this idea of not being good enough at the same time. So I am not lovable enough for this. Therefore, I must throw a tantrum in order to get attention. And it's something that's wrong with me. So that gets ingrained with the inner saboteur as well. I am not enough. I don't deserve to be soothed. I don't deserve to be met in my deepest, most vulnerable emotions. Another element of this protection mode is that we're not only protecting ourselves, we're protecting a very particular part of ourselves. We are protecting that soft, mushy inside. Like I think of a chocolate that has a gooey chocolate center, maybe like an M has a hard outer shell and then a soft chocolate inside. We are protecting the parts of us that we didn't want to get hurt, our innocence, our joy, our excitement. We're trying to keep that safe from harm so that it cannot be hurt by someone and taken away or stamped out by someone. The problem is that because we create this hard outer shell around the joy, around the excitement, the innocence, we end up mistaking that hard outer shell as our identity. And then we start to live into that identity. And as we live more and more into that shell, it becomes harder and harder to crack through it when we do meet somebody and we want to be in a loving relationship. That doesn't mean it can't be done. It just becomes more difficult as time goes by. So to recap that, why do we sabotage our relationships? Because we are moving away from that default mode of love that the ego knows and understands and is clinging onto with desperation because of the need to survive, because we don't feel worthy. We don't feel we deserve to receive love in this way. We might think that love needs to be earned. We might feel like this type of love doesn't fit our identity. Well, I'm just not the type of person to love somebody, to be vulnerable, to be in a deep, connected, emotionally enriching relationship. I'm just not that type of person, which, by the way, what does that even mean? What is a type of person? We're all just people. There's no types of people. We have our affinity. We have the things that we in particular like, but there is no person who is coded with the ability to be in a really great relationship. And trust me, if that was a thing, I don't know that I would be one of them. So I'm here to tell you, it's not a thing. We might think that we have to do something in order to be worthy of love. We have to serve somebody, or we have to achieve something in order to be worthy of receiving love in this way. And this, again, would stem back to childhood, most likely. We didn't learn that we deserved to be cherished, to be celebrated, to be loved fully for who we were, not for the things we did, not for the grades we got, for the amount of friends we had, for how studious we were, how popular we were. We didn't learn that we deserve love just for existing, just for being a human being on this planet. Now we'll get into, when do we self-sabotage in relationships? When are we most likely to have this inner saboteur come in and be at its loudest? In my experience, that sabotaging voice, those sabotaging actions and feelings and desires, they come forward in times of stress, in times of change, in times where we are transitioning, either in our physical context. It could be we're moving, we're having a baby, we are getting married. So the context of our relationship is changing. It could be that we are moving into a deeper level with each other. I have noticed that in my relationship. Anytime we were moving closer to each other, that's when the sabotaging voice got louder. These are times when emotions are heightened. There could be unknown things happening. We don't know what's around the corner, right? When big change is happening, a lot of the time we don't know what's going to happen. So you put that together with heightened emotions, and you're going to get this inner saboteur bubbling up to tell you why all of these things are wrong and why you should just run back to the thing that was safe. You might also notice the inner saboteur come forward when you are reminded of pain and heartbreak, either from a breakup, from a past relationship, from your childhood. Anytime that you are reminded of that pain, you might see this sabotaging tendency come up. The voice might say something like, "See, I told you you couldn't trust men. See, it happened again, just like it did with Bob. It happened again. This is why you can't ever be in a relationship, because you weren't made for this, and you can't be trusted, and men can't be trusted, and blah, 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 blah." It can also happen before we even get into a relationship. So if we're dating, if we're on the prowl for a potential mate, the inner saboteur can come in then and can sabotage a potential relationship. Maybe not even a potential relationship, just sabotaging what you think about men or women. So, you're walking around at the mall, you see a man who is a potential mate, and your inner saboteur comes up and goes, "Ugh, but men are stupid. And that man, especially, he's ugly. Look at him. Look at his big nose, and look at this and that, and all of these reasons why men are disgusting." That's your inner saboteur not wanting you to engage with a man, because you could get hurt by that man. The inner saboteur can actually keep you from even entering into a loving relationship, much less going further and further with somebody. It could stop you from even starting that relationship. That's why it's so important to address this inner saboteur, the sabotaging tendencies, because they can keep us from experiencing life, all of the fullness of life. Life is experiencing emotions in vulnerability, being seen in your emotions, in your experience, your unique experience that nobody else has. That's what the inner saboteur could keep you from, if not mitigated, if not inspected and explored. So how do we mitigate the inner saboteur? I'm going to go through these steps. I don't know that they need to be done in this order. I'm reflecting them in the order that I feel I went through them. So, inner saboteur, how do we mitigate it? Listen to what this part of you, remember, it's a part of you. This is not your entire being. You are not defined by this part of you. We are made up of so many parts. We are like a diamond with hundreds of facets. This is one facet of you. So, can you sit and listen? What is your inner saboteur saying? What is she telling you that you are and you aren't? What is she telling you to be afraid of? What is she telling you to be upset by, to attack somebody about, to criticize somebody for? What is she saying? That first step is always awareness. Awareness of what even is being said. In my experience, it can feel like a big storm of thoughts, of feelings, of sensations, yuckiness in my belly, in my shoulders, in my neck. Can we sit and just be with what is there? Give it some space to exist. I think a lot of the time we want to push it away. Don't look at it. Don't acknowledge it. We repress it so much that when the inner saboteur actually comes up, it takes full control. So can we sit, listen? What is your inner saboteur saying? That is the first step. Then I would say there's some element of noticing where these tendencies might come from. What are the origins of your inner saboteur? It can help to sit in meditation and actually look at your inner saboteur. Does she have a look? Does he have a facial expression? Is there a certain voice that comes through? Is it like a nagging voice like this? You always do this. You're always wrong and nobody really loves you. Is it like a booming voice? All of these different characteristics that we can actually sit and look at and can be quite informative. I notice that mine a lot of the time is like a screeching kind of teacher. And beneath that, so there's layers, that's the fun part. There are layers of inner child pieces that are scared that if I open up to somebody, I might not be lovable to them still if they see this certain side of me. So where is your inner saboteur stemming from? And it could be one particular moment. There could have been one very traumatic experience that you had. And notice if you have memories come up around your inner saboteur, around this inner child fear. Notice if there's memories, are there feelings? It might have come from something that wasn't a particular moment, but it was an extended circumstance that you lived under. Maybe there was a parent who over and over again acted in such a way, and you internalized this coping strategy, this saboteur. This is probably one of the most important questions that you can ask your inner saboteur or some layer. There's always layers with these things. So there might be your inner saboteur is the first layer, and then there's a layer of sadness under there. There's a layer of fear. When you sit with this, just know that there can be a lot of depth to this part, and there can be multiple parts sitting just behind that front-facing inner saboteur. But if you're able to, try to feel into what is the fear? What is this part of you afraid might happen if you were to be in vulnerability and connection with another person, with your partner? This is kind of the hard part because a lot of the time the fear could be about death. And I will explain that. Remember what I said about the inner saboteur being a self-preservation technique that we used in order to survive, in order to be taken care of as children. That fear of death, that fear of not being lovable. If you are not lovable as a child, at least in a child's perspective, you may not survive. You may not be taken care of. If you are left alone, you certainly won't survive. So that's kind of a fear that is ingrained into a lot of us. This fear that I will be abandoned and therefore I could die. That is why the inner saboteur comes up so strongly, because it is based around the idea of survival. And give yourself some patience for this particular part of the process because it might take some time for the truth to come forward. The truth can be quite painful to realize. But if we can discover what the fear is around, then that gives us information. We can act on information. That doesn't mean that suddenly we'll be happy, we'll be in a perfect relationship, and everything will be fine. That's not what this means. It just means that it will have finally a shred of information. My inner saboteur comes up because I am deeply afraid of being seen in total vulnerability, because that might mean that my partner wouldn't love me anymore because they see this certain side of me, and then they could leave me and I could be alone. And that's really scary for me. So give this particular step some time, some space, compassion if you can, some understanding. If you could talk to that part of yourself as if it were a dear friend or just a little baby, a child, your own child. Give yourself some space to kind of see this part of you with compassion. If we can bring in compassion, that breeds understanding. And you can do a lot with understanding. You can actually move forward with understanding, with compassion, with acceptance for what we have experienced, or why this inner saboteur is coming forward in the first place. And then you might start to get familiar with your inner saboteur. I told you there are all of these different parts of us, right? And like we're a diamond and we have all these facets, and all of these facets, all of these aspects of ourself, they all have something to say. And you might have noticed that when you're in an argument in your own head, and it's like there's actually two people in your brain that are arguing with each other. That's these parts that I'm talking about. So this part of you, this inner saboteur, is simply a part of you. You can form a relationship with this part of you. You can become familiar with it. Can you actually acknowledge when the inner saboteur comes forward and says, this is why you should never be in a relationship? Can you have that awareness that she or he is coming up, and take a second and go, hello, you're here. You're here with me now, inner saboteur. Welcome. Welcome to my headspace. And actually give that acknowledgement that the inner saboteur is here. That way you're kind of creating this record scratch in your brain where you're separating this kind of default way of thinking. Well, this is why I'll never be in love. This is why nobody will ever love me. Going through the same motions every day, you're creating a record scratch where you're teaching the brain to think of this matter, love, in a new way. This is how you do it. You catch yourself in the moment of being in that inner saboteur space. Once you start to acknowledge that the inner saboteur is here, can you have a conversation? What is it that you would like me to know right now? What are you afraid might happen right now? What information do you have for me right now? Because this is pure information that you're receiving from the inner saboteur. You're receiving knowledge and information about yourself. So if you can sit and listen and be in acceptance with this part of you, you can actually receive information for how to move forward, how to get the things that you want. You want that relationship? You want that job? Listen to your inner saboteur. Create familiarity with your inner saboteur. Doesn't mean that you have to start acting on the will of the inner saboteur. Absolutely not. In fact, most of the time you probably wouldn't want to do that. I can't think of a situation where you would. But you can acknowledge this part of you and hear them out. Make the inner saboteur feel like they have space to express the things that were not expressed before when you could not protect yourself. Give your inner saboteur that space. And then here's the fun part. Here's the part where I started to notice real change. I noticed that I was building a part of me that was at least as strong, if not stronger, than the voice of my inner saboteur. So if my inner saboteur was screaming about why I shouldn't be in this relationship and why it's so wrong for me and to get the fuck out, screaming, 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 suddenly there would be this deeper resonating voice that would come up, like the voice of reason, the voice of my intuition, of my deep knowing that I deserve love. I deserve this experience of love. So you'd have this chattering inner saboteur, blah, 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 blah. This is why you're not enough. This is why you're not worthy. And the deep voice would come in and go, no, that's not true. I know that's not true. And it wasn't angry. It wasn't a part of me that was like, shut up, inner saboteur. Get out of my way. It was very much the feeling of you're a little kid and you're crying, and somebody who has a really rich, strong presence comes and sits down next to you, and you just feel that instant soothing. That's the voice that started to develop within me as I did this work, this inner work to address my saboteur. And it happened over and over again. Every time that deep knowing voice would get stronger. And she's not loud. She doesn't yell and scream. She's actually quite quiet and yet very strong, this voice. And she would tell me, you know what you need to do. My inner saboteur would tell me, run to your room, slam the door, and don't talk to your partner for at least 24 hours. That's what I would do right now. Logically, we know as adults that's not really a great strategy for dealing with conflict in a relationship. That's when my deep knowing voice would come in and say, I don't think we should do that. I think we should probably meet him where he's at, or whatever the case was. She knew how to navigate these rough waters with strategies that actually work for me. They actually allow me to be in a loving, mutually respectful relationship. We all have this pillar of intuition, of knowingness of what we deserve. We all have that in us. Every single human on this planet has that. It might be clouded by our conditioning, by our pain, by our childhood experiences, of our experiences of love in general, but it's still there. Think of the sun shining in the sky. If a cloud moves in front of the sun, doesn't mean the sun isn't there anymore. That's like this pillar of intuition that we all have. I call it a pillar because it's a place that if we develop it, we can always return there. It will always be there holding us strong. Another way to address and mitigate the inner saboteur is to work with a coach or a therapist. Like me, I work with my clients all the time to have those dialogues that I talked about with the inner saboteur and actually speak to this part of us and acknowledge this part of us in an environment that feels safe, that feels guided by somebody who knows what they're doing. Because we can do all of this on our own. I do this work on my own all the time. And I will hire help too, because some of this stuff, we're so ingrained in our own shit, our own conditioning, that it can be difficult at times to do this on our own, especially if you don't have training around it. So I certainly recommend working with somebody who specializes either in parts work, or it could be internal family systems, any methodology that is related to exploring parts of ourselves. Hiring outside help is so worth the investment of not only your money, but your time, because it allows us to move through our shit with perspective, with guidance, with help. And us doing that not only allows us to have closer, more connected, more present relationships with our partner, but also with our family, with our friends, with our children. That's a big one, with your children. By doing this work, you would be giving your children the best gift they could ever receive. Because all of the shit that you undo, that you heal, that you integrate, that gets reflected in the life that your children get to live, the ways that your children receive love from you. Our children, they will mimic the ways that we show them love. So if we work on that in ourselves, they end up passing along a more healed version of love. to their children, and so on and so forth, all the way down our ancestral line. To end the show today, I want to share my personal experiences of working through the inner saboteur. I learned as I grew up to be very guarded with my emotions. I learned to run to my room and to process my emotions by myself because that felt easier. That felt doable to address things on my own and to not express emotions around other people. I felt like a burden to other people. I did not know if I was going to be met in the way that I really needed it to be. Therefore, it was easier and more manageable. Perhaps I had more control by going to my bedroom, slamming the door, and dealing with emotions by myself. This didn't really become a huge issue. It was an issue in some of my earlier relationships, but those tended to be a little more on the shallow side as far as emotions go, just because I was young. I didn't stay with one person for a very long time, so it didn't really give me time to open up in that way. But it certainly became an issue in my current relationship where I really, really, really loved someone and it was mutual and we both wanted a deep emotional connection. That was something that was important to us, very much so. Something that I craved deeply. You could see how there's some conflict with those two things. You deeply crave being known and being seen, and yet vulnerability is like a huge risk, very dangerous feeling for me at the time. So with each level of depth that we traversed together, my inner saboteur would come up and be like, bitch, why the fuck are you making me go further into this thing? Like, do you understand that the repercussions of what you're doing? If this guy leaves you, you're toast. You're done. You are done. You are dead if this guy leaves you. That was my perception. Every time we would go a level deeper, I would try to pick fights. I would make up reasons why he wasn't good enough. I would criticize him. I would project my shit onto him and try to create a reason why I should leave this man. Now, by doing inner work as I moved through these things, I was able to move past a lot of the really blatant inner saboteur stuff, the screaming, the total control that it had over my reactions to challenges in the relationship. I was able to move through a lot of that. And where I'm at now, I'm certainly not done. I definitely have self-sabotaging tendencies that come up, but I'm able to see what's happening now. That's the cool part. I still get disturbed by it. I still feel fear when it's there, but I'm able to understand on some level why it's happening, why it's there, and what it wants from me. That's a big one. Understanding what does this part of you need right now? A lot of the time it's to just be heard, to just be seen. This part just wants to be heard. I am afraid right now. Listen to me. You can just hear that part of you out. That's already a huge part of the healing process. I don't know if inner saboteur tendencies ever go away. I feel like we can make friends with the inner saboteur. We can create this kind of familiarity and understanding and this relationship with the inner saboteur, but I don't know if they ever go away. I can't say that. I'm 30 years old and mine is still here. I have a feeling that maybe it might just get quieter, or we're just able to manage this part of us with more and more efficacy and understanding as we get older and farther into our relationship. There's so much that I still want to learn. This is where I am thus far, and there's still so much to do and to to hear. And there's a lot of life transitions that me and my partner will be going through. We're getting married next year. I'm wondering what kind of inner saboteur messages and behaviors will want to bubble up around that time. It would be totally normal, totally understandable if that were the case. That is one of the biggest changes after doing all of this inner work, is having that compassion, having that deep knowing voice that can speak from my intuition with so much clarity, so much strength. When that part of me comes up, it's made a huge difference in my experience around the self-sabotaging experiences. And that's all I have for you on sabotage. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you being here. And as always, you can work with me. If any of this piqued your interest and maybe you're struggling with some of what we talked about today, I am a coach who works with people to address exactly these matters. You can reach out to me on Instagram. I am at Coached by Kelby, and you can also reach me via email, coachedbykelby@gmail.com. Thanks again. I'll see you next Friday.